Trapped in regrets.
Half an hour had passed since Dhaka and Lucas had a massive argument about the new songs they had been preparing for their upcoming debut. But still, the beating cold of winter could not even be compared to the cold air inside the studio. Gege and Tigra had long left with Dhaka after they had made sure to throw Lucas spiteful glares that had resonated with anger and disappointment, which Lucas could not understand at all. He had pushed this band for his own sake, they had said. He had disagreed his own bandmates. They had pointed out their reason couldn't have been more foolish, Lucas had thought. The studio had still been dead silence, with only the sound of a ticking clock on the wall filling up the entire room. Lucas could finally hear Jenny walking up to him. Had only been two of them left. She had not been part of the band, but she had always been around. Lucas, why don't you try to be more considerate of them? You know, maybe they have a point too. Jenny had voiced out her thought for the first time since the guys had left. Her voice had been soft, like she had been scared she would get on Lucas' bedside, which ironically had been exactly what she had been doing right now. The anger within him had been boiling even more when he had realized not even his own best friend had been on his side. What exact point do you mean they have? That I am pushing them to always practice and produce music for my own sake? Did you even hear them? I did everything so this band would make it big. Don't they all want to debut? I know, but don't you think you overworked them a little much? Dhaka couldn't even sleep a wink this past few days because he always revising the song you reject. That's just his responsibility as the composer of the band, Lucas had showed pointedly. He had no idea why that had even been an issue, but the fact that the girl had been defending Dhaka instead of trying to understand his viewpoint had been what had annoyed him the most. She used to be the one only who would get his attention, but not at the moment, apparently. I'm just afraid that this will be the end for all of you. It didn't feel like any of the argument you guys had before. Usually, in the end, Dhaka would still listen to whatever you had to say, even though he had shown his opposition at first. She had explained with worry. Maybe you've pushed them over the edge. If you feel that bad for him, then go to him instead of staying here, Lucas had told her off with an unrelenting glare. She had stared at Lucas with what had looked like disappointment and hurt. A few seconds of silence, she had walked to the entrance and left Lucas to himself. The man could not have cared less. It would be their loss if they had not come back anyway. They had never come back. It had been a month since their last argument, and no one of Dhaka, Tigra, Gege, and even Jenny had tried to reach out to him. Lucas has honestly thought their anger would have dissipated after 1 or 2 days like it usually had been, but it had not, which had resulted in stress and frustration for him. They had already been halfway to debut. At least half of the tracklist had been ready, but since there had been no one around to accompany him singing with instrument, it had been impossible to practice. He could play guitar, but it would still be pointless. His dream had always been to debut in a band, not as a soloist. Assuming that his old bandmates had not had any plan to come back, Lucas had decided to just move on and start a new chapter. He had decided that he had not need the guys if they had not the same goal. He had decided that he should not care if they could not even see what he had been doing for the team. He could look for a new member to fill the void member who had actually been on the same page with him. Lucas had just done recruiting several people whom had thought had been suitable for his band when he had decided to head out for dinner. Arriving at the restaurant of his choice, he had immediately looked for an empty seat and had met his order. A lot had been going on his mind. He had wondered whether or not he had made the right decision, whether the band would be able to hit the breakthrough in the industry with the people who had taken, and other similar thought. Besides, as much as he had wanted to ignore, there had still been a tiny niggling thought concerning his old friends, especially Jenny, in the back of his mind. The existence of this pondering had simply been inevitable, mainly because all of them had been together since college, and the sudden massive change about the band formation as well as their friendship had obviously still been too new for Lucas to adapt to. He had been too deep in his own thought on the point that he had not noticed a person walking up to him. The young man had hooked up, found the girl who had been occupying him a small part of his mind sitting across the table, then pursed his lips as a relation to hit him. The restaurant had been Jenny. He had not even been aware the entire time he had walked here. It had been like his feet had mind of their own and took him to this place. Lucas would not deny the contentment that had washed over him when Jenny had initiated a conversation, but as it had gone on, his mood had only turned more and more sour as the girl had kept on telling him to get his act together even after he had told her that he had found new members as replacement. She had started bringing back about their past, like things that they had gone through since college, and even their half-ready debut track, which had been put on hold because of the sudden breakup. It had annoyed him so much. Lucas genuinely had no clue why she had kept asking him to go back to Dhaka, Gege, and Tigra when they had been the fact and the one who had left him. It had also hurt him that she had still not been on his side. He had thought that out of everyone, she would have been the one who had understood and supported him no matter what. And so, with the growing irritation bubbling on the pit of his stomach, Lucas had proceeded to leave the restaurant. His body had been getting hot, either because of the hot coffee he had just had or his anger towards Jenny. The snow at night had not even been cold for him this time. But then, as he had walked towards his house, Lucas had seen a familiar man who had looked like he had been drunk on the side of the road, precisely in the corner of the alley. He had been limping and kind of giggling all by himself. As it had been too dark for Lucas to see clearly, he had squinted his eyes in hope to get a better look at the person. The other man had looked back at him in surprise. He immediately had run past Lucas as the latter thought he had looked very much alike with Geralt, his new drummer.
His suspicion had been confirmed a few days later. It had been another day of training with Lucas' new band members. With the goal of debuting as soon as they could, they had decided to practice 5 days a week with the duration of 10 hours per day. Lucas had just stepped into the room when he caught Geralt smoking weed with a few other members. Lucas had been in shock, but on top of everything, he had gotten terribly mad at the fact that they had the audacity to do it behind his back inside his studio. Lucas had known how harmful any kinds of drugs could be, and there had been simply things which he would never even consider. However, knowing that his own members had been people who normalized drug use, he had immediately felt like he had gotten himself into something he should have never touched. He had instantly felt like everything had been a mistake. He had not wanted to get involved with people like them, especially when they had shrugged his anger off as easily as blowing those smokes and then asked him if he had wanted to join them. Lucas had now known why sometimes he had noticed their red eyes during practice. He had thought it had been just because of the lack of sleep they had. They also had often acted oddly during discussions, but Lucas had not paid it enough attention either. He had not cared about all of that as long as they had performed well and made good music, which they had been really talented at, but this had been where he had drawn the line. After giving his members a piece of his mind and cancelling that day's practice, also potentially any future practice, Lucas had headed out to the first place he could think of.
The distance between Lucas' studio and Jenny's restaurant had been relatively close because it could be reached only by walking. But today, New York had been in a snowstorm that required him to drive a car to get there. Jenny's restaurant had always been his place of peacefulness, one that he could return to whenever he had wanted. Once he got there, he had looked around the corner and found Jenny talking to a woman. As much as he had needed Jenny now, he had not wanted to interrupt her time with that woman and decided to find his own table. "I can't wait anyway," he had mumbled as he had taken off his coat and started to order food. 10 minutes. It had been exactly 10 minutes since his food had come out, but he had not bothered to touch it yet. And it also had been 10 minutes since he had started staring at Jenny, who had still been talking to the woman earlier. He would be lying if he had said he had not missed this kind of moment. A moment that had always been his favorite, wherein Jenny not noticing his presence while his attention was fully set on her. If someone had asked what the three things that Lucas had adored the most had been, his answer would have been music, deep conversation, and enjoying his time alone. Now, looking at how the situation that had gone on, Lucas had had all of it. Staring at Jenny while the sound of the music had been filling the restaurant, which somehow had blended in beautifully with other people's conversations around him as the background. And he had been there, witnessing all of it, alone, drowned in his favorite moment. He couldn't help himself other than adore her more and more. "This is enough," Lucas had sighed eventually as he had closed his eyes for a second. He had treasured everything that had just happened, and it had been enough for him. As if luck had been on Lucas' side, Jenny had come up to him as soon as he had turned his head away. She had sat in front of him, and now he could clearly see her brown eyes and long black hair that hung down protecting her neck from the freezing weather this afternoon. "What do you want now? What else do you need to say after everything you told me last week, bragging that your band is doing much better now that you've gotten new members?" Jenny had asked sarcastically, her cold eyes piercing into his soul. He had never once been the receiving end of her unfriendly treatment. It had pained him. "No, it's a complete opposite," Lucas had said, and it had spurred a change of reaction from the girl. "What do you mean the opposite?" Just like that, he had told her everything, from the chronology of the earlier event, how he had felt about everything that had been going on since they had grown apart, as well as how sorry he had been for realizing and admitting it all too late. And throughout the entire time he had been telling her, Lucas had noticed the way her expression had been softening, almost like she had been glad to hear it all, glad that he had chosen to open up. "Hey, Lucas, do not just apologize to me. Go apologize to Dhaka, Tigra, and Gege. They wouldn't want to hear it from me. Who says? Look, I'll even help you." At her response, Lucas had sighed in mixed bliss, relief, and gratefulness. This girl had always known how to make him feel better, and he had been so glad that he had come to his senses. Lucas genuinely had no idea what he would have done if it had not been for her, just as things had always been for the past 4 years. He had grabbed her hand and held it as he couldn't hide his smile, and she had returned the same one. As if most of the weights had been lifted off his shoulders, Lucas had also become more relaxed while he had done some more talking with the brown-eyed girl. He had missed her, and he had wanted this moment not to end yet.
As Jenny had promised, she really had helped him. Somehow in some way, she had gotten all the guys gathered at her house a few days later. How shocked Dhaka, Gege, Tigra, and even Lucas had been to find each other there. It had turned out to be Jenny's way of helping them make up and reunite. The beginning of the process had not been exactly smooth, but they had managed to sort everything out eventually. Jenny had absolutely played a huge part in solving the problems. She had been like glue that had kept them together again, and Lucas couldn't have been more thankful for her. Moreover, Jenny had revealed that she had done something without the boys knowing, which had been leaking one of their songs through the internet because the girl had thought it had been too good to just be kept in the studio. She had uploaded the song in the music platform as she had been sure it would explode in the market, and just how right she had been. Some well-known artists had shared the song in their social media, and within the span of a few days, it had started gaining people's attention. But the song was not approved by Lucas for release, Tigra had commented as he eyed the said man. A mere smile had crept on Jenny's face at the sight of Lucas looking away awkwardly, almost in shame even. The vocalist had told him to revise that particular song over and over because the perfectionist side in him had not yet satisfied with the arrangement. However, the positive public response had clearly proved him wrong. Now, it obviously doesn't matter now, does it? The song is doing well, and it looks like Lucas has realized it as well. Recovering his smile, Lucas had looked back at her before looking back at the other three. Yeah, let me apologize for being so harsh before. Maybe I just worried too much. You surely did. I told you there was nothing more I could do to perfect that. Everyone could tell Dhaka had been half joking, half serious with that line, and it had brought them to laugh. They had been happy to find themselves in this nice atmosphere now that everything had been cleared. They had known, from this point on, better days had been waiting for them ahead. The bad ones had been over, and Lucas, along with Dhaka, Gege, also Tigra, had been ready to turn over a new leaf and start fresh. Then, as what they had prepared themselves for, days later, they had woken up to their song completely blowing up in charts. The song had suddenly become a hit. Many media had been playing it, people in the streets had been singing to it, and everyone had grown even more curious of the artists behind the masterpiece. They had gotten contact and invited to some shows, and in no time, the band has skyrocketed. It had absolutely been their breakthrough in the industry, like everything had been too good to be true. Jenny, as loyal as she had always been towards the guys, had become their manager along the way as they had slowly gotten busier. They all had known she would be the perfect person for the role. It had been a perfect ending for everyone. No, it would have been a perfect ending that Lucas wished had actually happened instead. But none of it was true. Their band never got to reunite.
Lucas stared blankly at the television, airing a documentary of a rising band. A band that he already knew too well in some sense. The screen showed clips after clips of their successful stages, interviews, personal stories, how their band took a quantum leap after their best friend put up their song on the internet, and so forth. He had seen some of those clips, had not seen the rest. The scene that got Lucas' attention the most, however, was when the keyboardist shared a story about things that he thought had helped them reach the peak of their career. With his eyes somehow releasing their focus in reminiscence, the man on screen revealed that a colleague of theirs had showed them their true passion and potentials in music. The extreme hours of practice they had gone through every day because of this person had made them realize their values, both as a musician and a person, which they were very thankful of. The keyboardist added that even though they had to go separate ways in the end, he still hoped this person was doing well out there.
that keyboardist on the television was Dhaka. And his words hit Lucas right through his entire soul, successfully reopening the box of sorrow that he managed to put aside for a short while. It brought back all kinds of memories and regrets, so many regrets that still haunted him to this day. A heavy sigh was let out. The man put down the remote as he leaned his head onto the back of his couch, accompanied solely by the faint sound from the television blaring in the background. Another sigh escaped his lips. Lucas then closed his eyes, readying himself to be trapped in an ocean of thoughts and emotions once again. How could the situation have been if things had been different? If he had not been too blinded by his own ego and had wanted to compromise with his friends, with himself then, would he have been at where he wanted now? His mind flew back to the moment Dhaka, Gege, and Tigra had walked away from his studio after their fight a few years back. It was the last time he had seen them. Yes, he now knew the reason why they all chose to leave him. He had been aggressively setting his focus on his goal to the point that he had dismissed the importance of everything else around him, including his own friends. He forgot to value their worth. He forgot to treat them like how they had deserved to be treated. It had taken him years to realize what he had done wrong, and more years to accept his situation. He was still in the process of accepting it, to be truthful. He still found himself imagining and making up different scenarios of how his life could have turned out from time to time, just like what he had done just now. It never failed to make him feel like such a loser. He did not even have someone to stop him from roaming around in the state of insanity. He always felt all alone, isolated from the rest of the world no matter how many people he might be surrounded by. Jenny, she was no longer here. She had long left him for the same reason Dhaka, Gege, and Tigra did. And Lucas had nobody to blame it on other than himself. The day Lucas had found out his den members were drug users, which also happened to be the last time he had gone to Jenny's restaurant, the disclosure between Jenny and he never occurred. There had only been more arguments. He had lied to her again, pushed her away for the upteenth time. His pride had been through the roof that he didn't have the guts to unclog his feelings and struggles even to the one friend he should have known to trust at the time. Lucas had failed to keep her. He lost her too. Rubbing his face that looked like an absolute mess now, Lucas pulled out a shabby cardstock paper from a drawer next to him. It was an invitation from 2 years ago that he never bothered attending. He snorted to himself at the fact that he did not even throw it away. It was like he purposely kept it just to be reminded of his pain and regrets. He continued to stare at Dhaka and Jenny's wedding invitation in his hand. Again, he wondered whether he could have been the one who ended up with her if things had been done differently. He had always known that he had loved Jenny enough, but there had always been something that had stopped him from running the risk. Now, he realized just how stupid he had been for thinking so. He had never even made his feelings reach her. He had never appreciated her enough. He had taken her for granted. After all, there was never a single day that had passed without him regretting his past. All he could do was continuing to dwell on the what-ifs. Because by the time he had realized everything that had gone wrong, it had been all too late. Lucas knew that it was too late to even wish he could turn back time. The situation he was in was inescapable, but he knew that all that was left to do was to come to terms with it. The only thing he did not know was whether he had enough power to overcome it.
The end.